Hi, I'm Dr. Boyce Watkins from YourBlackWorld.com, and many of you saw that there were, I believe, a total of 35 teachers indicted down in Atlanta in a massive cheating scandal. The biggest fish pulled in by the authorities was Dr. Beverly Hall, who was former superintendent of the year. And, I thought it was very strange to see teachers possibly going to prison in a scandal that involved cheating, and then to have so many of them indicted at one time. So I really wanted to understand what was going on and whether or not this makes any sense. So I talked to one of the greatest educational scholars that I know, Dr. Christopher Emdin at Columbia University. Dr. Emdin, how are you today, sir?
I'm doing very well, man.
Good, good. Now, I got to ask you, first of all, do you know of any case where this has happened before, where teachers and superintendents and administrators can possibly go to prison for possibly cheating on a standardized test? Have you heard of anything like this?
There's no case that I know of where there has been sort of this vast amount of folks surrounding one scandal getting arrested and indicted. There have been a number of stories, or a number of situations in schools, though, where teachers have been fired or reprimanded for cheating on tests, where students after the test have mentioned that, their teacher may have given them an answer or two. So this is actually, I think an example is being made of these folks in Atlanta, but it's part of a larger, more pervasive issue that exists in schools across the country. My take on this is really quite simple. We have the situation where these folks are being, and rightfully so, where these folks are being reprimanded for cheating. And it's not good for them to cheat. They set poor examples for students when they cheat. It sort of paints educators as not being honest and truthful as we should be. But what I think is most fascinating about this case is that the law that these teachers and this principal and these administrators are being arrested over, they're being arrested on racketeering charges. They're being charged with racketeering under a law that's actually modeled after the federal RICO statute. The federal RICO statute is a racketeer influence and corrupt organization statute. In essence, they're being indicted under the fact that they were part of a criminal organization and enterprise that was intended to defraud the public. And what I find most interesting about this is, if you're going to arrest teachers and principals under racketeering for a corrupt organization, then damn it, we need to indict the entire school system, because the entire school system is a racketeer influence and corrupt organization. We have to look at the symptoms that created the scenario where these people felt that they had no choice but to cheat. If the mechanism for assessment of young people in classrooms, particularly young people of color who are from traditions that are very different from how they're traditionally assessed. It's young people in classrooms who are from the oral tradition, who engage in projects, who think deeply, who are able to analyze things deeply, who are brilliant in their modes of communication and their modes of sharing knowledge, are being assessed on a single test. Then those young people are forced to fail. And the teachers who are teaching these young people do not have a tool from the school system all the way up, I would argue, to the Department of Education, to have a tool that can accurately assess the knowledge of young people. So they're given a flawed test that cannot showcase the intelligence of their students. So the students are not doing well on that test because the test is inherently biased and inherently flawed. They're being told that if the students don't pass these tests, they're going to be fired and they're going to lose their jobs. We have to keep in mind that these teachers are amongst the lowest paid teachers in the country. It's not that they want to cheat necessarily, although cheating is wrong. It's that the institution has created a scenario that forces them to feel like they have no other alternative but to allow the kids to pass these idiotic tests so that they can keep their jobs, so that they can maintain their livelihood. And so now they go through this process. They have the kids cheat on this test. They engage in this process, which is wrong. I'm not justifying their practice, but I want us to understand why they did what they did. And they're forced to do this, and then they're being made an example of. Meanwhile, the bigger influence, the biggest corrupt organization that's forcing this to happen gets on scot-free, and they get the opportunity to point fingers at these black and brown teachers for cheating on a test when they gave them the wrong test, and the test was inherently biased, and they gave them no other options but to cheat. The reality is that the way those tests were framed, the way those tests were created, we know as educational researchers about the bias in these standardized exams. We know that these exams don't capture the multiplicity of the knowledges of our people. And so we know that the kids, they're going to fail on tests. And it's not at all a marker of their intelligence. And so these folks are put behind the eight ball, and now they're being made an example out of. And you know, it's problematic that they engage in these practices, but boy, you know, it's just ironic that you will attempt to indict somebody on racketeer influence and corrupt organization statute when the context in which they were placed in is in itself a corrupt organization.
Interesting. So, Dr. M, I have to ask you, I'll say this, you know, to reprimand somebody and fire them or even humiliate them for what they've done, you know, that's one thing. Sending them to prison is another. Many of these people will be in prison for the rest of their lives if they're convicted. And I don't get it. It doesn't make a lot of sense to me. And I want to ask you, you know, in your opinion, is this move racist, or do you think that it's just a bad move overall?
You know, what I think is this. I think that, you know, the testing activities and what they're being reprimanded for is common practice. It's common practice in school districts with folks of color, but it's also common practice in other schools as well. And, you know, I don't want to outrightly call someone racist without doing my research, but I do know that if these issues, and those of us in the world of education that knows that this is a norm, you know, I'm forced to question why it is that this 21-month-long criminal investigation, you know, followed this particular population when we know that this is simply an issue that exists across the country. What I would have liked to see, what would have, for me, shown more just practice is if there was an expose to showcase how this happened across settings, because it does exist across settings. So there are questions about why this particular school district was identified, and I won't go out there and make a bold statement like that yet simply because I haven't done enough research. But best believe if I do my research and I find out that is the case, I'll be the first person to let you know that it is.
Interesting. Well, you know, I'll tell you, I don't think it's a coincidence when we have so many situations where black people are made an example out of. You know, it goes back hundreds of years that we receive harsher penalties for the same crime. And I think this goes beyond a reprimand. I think a reprimand is when you dock someone's pay, you suspend them, or you fire them. This is destroying somebody's life. If I'm a teacher, if I'm a young teacher, there's no way in hell I'm going to go into that field now, because I'm thinking, oh my gosh, I'm going to be put, you know, between a rock and a hard place. So almost like those mothers who are forced to send their children to inadequate schools, and when they send their children to a school outside the district, they want to lock them up and send them to prison, like they did to the lady in Connecticut. You know, I don't want to be stuck between a rock and a hard place where I'm either being judged by this test that doesn't work, that doesn't properly measure my student's ability, or I risk going to prison trying to keep my job. I'm going to avoid the industry altogether. I mean, it almost seems to me that if you go, someone wrote an article on this where they said that this goes all the way up to the White House, that, you know, this lady, Beverly Hall, wasn't an ordinary superintendent. She was superintendent of the year. She is an established educator. She's well respected all throughout the country. She was sitting next to Education Secretary Arne Duncan, and it almost seems silly that we wouldn't somehow reflect on the broader system within which she was trying to operate and somehow try to pretend like her arrest and the arrest of 34 other educators was not somehow linked to the problems in the system. We're talking about 35 people. I mean, listen,
Beverly Hall is not the victim. Let's you know, I don't think she's a victim here. You know, and I think what we have to understand is exactly what you described. So it's not this executive leader who has, you know, got all these accolades, because somebody who has gained that type of position in the world of education, and has had the opportunity to sit with the Secretary of Education and sort of share ideas and thoughts about teaching, that person has the social capital to be able to advocate for a different form of assessment for the students of her district. She had that opportunity to do so. The victims here are the teachers. They are the school improvement specialists. They are the school secretary, who is making, I would, you know, in many instances, a fifth or sixth of the salary of the school administrator, who's being told that this is what you need to do, otherwise you won't be able to keep your job. But who is now wrapped up into the scenario? And I mean, the victim is not the person who has the social capital to be able to change the structure of the institution that forces them to cheat. The victim is the person who is then part of the process because they have no other options. And the larger victims are the kids. And we haven't talked about the children here. Because if these children take this test, and then their tests are then changed, and they go on to the next grade, and then they hear about this scenario, they then start to question their own intelligence because they've been forced to believe that this test that they took is the only way to show that you're smart. And on this test, you were smart, so you passed on. And now we're telling you that, nope, you're not as smart as you thought. You know, so the issue is not even just the test itself. It's also the false narrative about the test being the ultimate marker of intelligence, and then later on, a year later or 2 years later, snatching that intelligence back from the young people because they cheated on the only one way you can show that you're smart.
Wow. Well, you know, you're smart, and that's why I wanted your opinion on this. I will say that I'm concerned about what's happening down in Atlanta. I think this is a very bad precedent, and I think I probably take it personally because my mother's been in the education system for over 25 years, and she's a little bit younger than Beverly Hall, and I would just be mortified to know that my mother might spend the rest of her life in prison over something that normally would just get her fired or suspended. You know, so I hope that justice is served in this case, and to me, justice does not mean prosecuting a group of teachers as if they are, Al Capone gangsters who are going around terrorizing people. I mean, RICO laws were not designed to send teachers to prison. I think we have to keep that in mind. So thank you very much, Dr. Emdin. I really appreciate all of your wisdom here.
My absolute pleasure.
All right, and to those who are listening, thank you for checking us out at yourblackworld.com. And until we meet again, please stay strong, be blessed, and be educated. We are gone. Peace.